Sunny. Okay. Okay. It's okay. Yeah.
Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Welcome to one and all. We're so glad to have you this morning. This includes those of you who are in the room with us, as well as the many of you who are streaming with us this morning. It's so good to have all of you here. We want to begin, as always, by embracing all that you bring with you, all of your uniqueness, your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, all that helps make you who you are is welcome here today. And this, again, includes those who hear me say this each Sunday, as well as those who might be joining us for the first time today. You're equally as welcome and appreciated. I do not have any announcements I need to give this morning, so I'm going to give you a couple of extra minutes to greet one another. As always, I do hope that you'll say hi to those you know and look forward to seeing each Sunday, as well as meet some new folks today. And if you're streaming with us, feel free to text somebody or shoot someone a quick email and let them know you're thinking of them. Thank you so much. Hate to interrupt. We'll have more opportunity to visit with one another during social hour after the service, so please do stay around for that. Before we light our chalice, Tom Moser just let me know of a worthy announcement to make this morning, so I will let you take that, Tom.
Thank you. Well, good morning. My name's Tom Moser. The Board of Trustees and I and a couple of three other people for the last almost 20 months have been working on a major overhaul of our church bylaws. And this past few days ago, you all received a communication from our illustrious president, Lynn Janesian, that explains the coming program for the whole congregation to become involved with that review and ultimately adoption of these revised bylaws. So be on the lookout for something that you probably received, and it's a short handout, questions and answers about things that you might want to know about the upcoming 4 workshops that are going to be held 2 weeks apart. After the service, there'll be, not after the service, but will be by Zoom workshops. There will be a board member at the back table between the services that will answer questions about the draft of these revised bylaws that will be sent out to you. And it's very important that we all get involved, know what's in them, and offer comments so they can be revised by the board before they're ultimately presented to the congregation. So look for that question and answer sheet that Lynn Janesian sent out by email a few days ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, for all your work and the board for all of its work on looking at our bylaws. As Tom said, it's been going on for almost 2 years, and you know, our board is supposed to meet, I think, minimum of 10 times a year, and they've been meeting every Monday night in addition to their regular board meetings for 20 months or so. So we owe them a debt of gratitude. Yeah, that's right. So we are going to move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
The opening reflection this morning comes from the January 2022 edition of the Unitarian Touchstones Journal. Renewal is the way of the earth, through seeds that burst, grow, bloom, through fallen leaves that become compost, enriching the soil, through heavy snows pruning trees by breaking weaker branches and conserving soil moisture, through periodic fires renewing diverse ecosystems, through small floods cleansing rivers and other natural processes. We would do well to understand that we need renewal, individually and collectively. Renewal can come through rest, a walk in the woods, by observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy, by time spent with family and friends conversing, sharing a meal, or both. We are not the Energizer Bunny. We cannot go on endlessly. Renewal is a process of repair of the body, mind, and soul. Only through self-care will we have the motivation and capacity to work to repair the world.
Please rise for our first in-service hymn, Break Not the Circle, number 323. Break not the circle of enabling love.
right, we are now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our hearts and minds this morning. I did not receive any specific request, so let's move right into a moment of silence on behalf of those that you might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud at this time if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. And we now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which helps sustain this community and our mission to the larger world. And it is now time for our story for all ages, our time for all ages. So if anybody would like to come up to the front and sit on the floor, or you can sit on the floor back there. Here they come. All right. Now, this is somebody I don't think a lot of you have met. So why don't you start by introducing yourself? Well, is that a multiple choice question? No, I'm just saying I think you should introduce yourself. Well, are you sure about that? I'm pretty sure about it. Would you please introduce yourself? Well, okay. Hi, my name is Northerner Snerd. Why are you introducing yourself to me? You live with me. I know who you are. I'm saying introduce yourself to the folks out there. Why don't you? Well, is that a multiple choice question? No. Just introduce yourself to folks, would you? Well, okay. All of them? To all of them. All right. This could take some time. It's already taking some time. Okay, my name is Northerner Snerd. It's nice to meet you. Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Northerner Snerd. It's nice to meet you. Okay, thank you. That's great. My name is Northerner. Now, what are you doing? Well, you told me to introduce myself to all of them. Well, yeah, but you don't have to do it to each individual, Mortimer. Once was enough. Oh, gosh. You know, Charlie McCarthy always says I'm the stupidest dummy he ever knew. Well, you know, you and Charlie come from another era, but we don't call people stupid anymore, do we? You don't? Nope. Well, what do you call us? Well, we don't call you anything. Yep, probably did her just to ignore us. No, we don't ignore you either. It's just not nice to call people stupid anymore. Well, why not? Well, it's not considered politically correct. Politically, you mean you don't have any politicians that are stupid? Well, we just recognize that there are people that have lots of different kinds of intelligence, and they're intelligent in different ways. So you may not be smart at some things, but you're intelligent at some things. Like what? Well, let's see. I know you like to stay informed, don't you? Do I? Yeah, I see you read the newspaper every morning. Oh, no, I don't read the newspaper every morning. You don't? No, Charlie McCarthy and I like to do the crossword puzzles together. Oh, okay, well, that takes intelligence to do the crossword puzzle. Yep, Charlie likes to do the white squares and I do the black squares. Okay, well, anyway, let's see, maybe you're intelligent. Hey, I know, you're a nice, sensitive person. I'll bet you're emotionally intelligent. Emotionally intelligent? Yeah, what does that mean? Well, it means that, you're aware of your own emotions and you're sensitive to the emotions of those around you. Oh, can you use it in a sentence, please? Well, let's see. Let's say I've worked all day and wasn't able to accomplish anything I wanted. I failed at a lot of things and people kept interrupting me. How do you think that makes me feel at the end of the day? Oh, let me think about that. Happy. Happy? Why would I feel happy? Well, because the day is almost over with. Okay. All right, let's try it a different way. Let's say I skip work, I go to a carnival, I go on all of my favorite rides, and I see lots of fun performances, and I eat all the cotton candy and hot dogs that I want. Now how do you think I feel? Let's see, sad. Sad? Why would I feel sad about that? Because you got to go back to work in the morning. Okay. All right, well, let's see. I don't know. There's got to be a way that you're super intelligent. How about artistically? Are you artistically intelligent? Well, what's that mean? Well, are you a stone cutter? Nope. Do you like to draw? Nope, can't draw. Well, do you paint? Well, I did try painting on numbers one time. Painting by numbers, how'd that go? Not so good. Why not? Well, there weren't any black squares to fill out. Okay, well, unfortunately, I'm sure you're a very intelligent person, but we'll have to spend more time at some point in the future trying to figure out exactly in what way you are intelligent. But for now, we're going to have to go because we're running out of time. So why don't you say goodbye? Well, is that a multiple choice question? On second thought, I don't think we have enough time for you to say goodbye. So see you later, Mortimer. I'll see you later. Let's sing our kids out. What does that mean? Well, you'll find out. Thank you.
The meditation and Words in Silence comes from the online publication Words That Matter, submitted by Nancy Gibbs. Listen. My word of the year is one whose meaning is in its music. The listen is a quiet word, the half-swallowed L, the diffident I, and softly hissing S. It defies the shouts and roars and brays and bluster. Listening is hard when the sounds around us grow mean and ugly, and listening takes particular courage in divisive times. Courage is not just about standing up for what you believe, Doug Emmeldorf tells us students at Harvard. Sometimes courage is about sitting down and listening to what you may not initially believe. Which is not to say that if we all just listen more, our wounds would heal, our conflicts end. Nor does it mean abandoning our values. It's always wise to seek the truth in our opponent's error and error in our own truths. Theologian Ronald Niebuhr said, listening closely and bravely to opposing views deepens our insights and sharpens our arguments, especially in our public life. Our fierce public battles, political fights that had infected our friendships and family, have degraded our discourse, defaced institutions, and disturbed our peace. I grew up in Quaker schools, which included regular silent meetings. This did not come naturally to 9-year-olds. But I learned then that we can't hear the soft, sane voice inside us if we're talking all the time, and certainly not if we're shouting. Instead, let's listen, invite surprise, invest in subtlety, and surrender to silence every once in a while.
How many of you here think? Okay, good. You had to think about that one, yeah. Most of us think, hopefully, but we don't tend to think a lot about thinking, which is unfortunate because it's such a big part of our lives. But I think a lot about thinking because of the author of this book, Think Like an Octopus, Dr. Wallace Roark, who was my philosophy and logic professor in college. So I'm still thinking a lot about thinking, largely because of his mentorship. So I'm going to read a little bit longer than I usually do, but I think you'll find this section interesting. This is from a section entitled, Thinking Invites Trouble. When in 1937 Lyndon Johnson first went to the House of Representatives, his fellow Texan Sam Rayburn, House Majority Leader, counseled him, "Lyndon, the way you get along is to go along." The truth is that any time we begin thinking, we are apt to make enemies. And in our one chance at life between the cradle and the casket, we need to make as few enemies as possible. One of the most dependable ways to avoid making enemies is to go along with whatever the majority thinks. But at the heart of good thinking is the realization that much we have been taught is not true. Once we accept the idea that authorities, even experts and professionals, could be wrong, we begin trying to figure why their views are accepted. If we believe we have discovered something nearer the truth, we may begin to question socially accepted truths and conventional wisdom. There is another danger that accompanies thinking. If we think on anything long enough, we are likely to tell others what we have been thinking. and put our thoughts into action. Anytime we put our thinking on public display, we have chosen a quick and easy way to lose friends and alienate people. Societies cannot operate without consensus. Those who do not go along commonly are ostracized or ignored. They find they have become social misfits. But on the other hand, what are we to do if our mind or conscience will not let us go along? What are we to do if our mind will not walk away and find other things to think about? What if we insist on what we see as the truth? What if our mind will give us no rest until we do our own thinking? What happens if we decide that although thinking is dangerous, not thinking might be more dangerous? Maybe socially accepted wisdom is a lie, even if it is a lie that works well. However, we find that this is one sleeping dog that we cannot let lie. Error or ignorance may appear to work better than the discovery and revelation of truth, but we suspect truth has never been given a fair trial. No matter what the cost, some of us are going to think. But if we are to challenge accepted wisdom and with any degree of confidence, it is important our thinking be clear, comprehensive, and cogent. Thank you so much, Maura. Most of us here, I'm guessing, understand that there's little, if anything, that we can know with absolute certainty, and it is therefore important for us to keep an open mind. It's important because such understanding makes us critical of all thinking, including our own, especially our own, and more tolerant of those with different views than us. Unfortunately, there are many in our world so certain of their own beliefs that they are threatened by and despise those who think differently. This is so even though the notion that all people should be free to express themselves, including those that we disagree with, is a basic tenet of the Enlightenment principles that both our society and our liberal religion is founded upon. Yet I've noticed in ordinary discourse that most of us, even the most liberal of us, tend to use idioms suggesting we can be certain of what we are saying or agreeing with. Absolutely, definitely, totally, exactly, precisely, I completely agree, for sure, surely, sure thing, you bet, of course, without a doubt, no question. We also have a few common idioms suggesting our absolute disagreement with contrary ideas, right? Certainly not. Surely not. Of course not. Absolutely not. I totally disagree. I completely disagree. No way. That's insane. That's crazy. That's nuts. Anybody here ever said any of those things? Never. Never. Even now, I was about to begin my very next sentence with the phrase, of course. Of course we tend to use absolutisms casually, rather than simply saying we tend to use absolutisms casually. Or it seems to me that we tend to use absolutisms casually. But when I begin a sentence with of course, as I often do, it's not because I'm absolutely certain of whatever I'm about to say, but because it has become an ordinary and habitual way of writing and speaking for me, just as it has for many of us. I use that term lazily rather than literally. But to be reasonably confident, the idioms I've just listed are seldom meant to be taken literally by most people. I would have to study a few linguists on the matter, consider the value of their reasoning and their research, then present you with some of their data to prove my point. Even then, there is likely to be some disagreement among linguists on this subject. Based upon such research, rather than beginning my sentence with of course, I'd have to say some linguists say that we tend to use absolutisms casually. But what is not to be missed here is that even though a sentence based on solid research is stronger than one that isn't, the statement that begins with some rather than of course sounds the weaker to us. So during normal discourse, we tend toward absolutisms because we feel that the surer we sound, the stronger our point. Absolutely, definitely, totally, exactly, precisely, I completely agree, for sure, surely, sure thing, you bet, of course, without a doubt, no question, indubitably, my dear Watson. Reinforcing our arguments by merely pointing out that some people agree with us doesn't sound as convincing as suggesting anyone in their right mind must agree with us. Of course. The term some, furthermore, is too vague to be meaningful if it isn't quantified. Some can refer to most or to only a few. Saying most linguists agree that we tend to use absolutisms casually sounds more convincing to us than saying a few linguists agree that we tend to use absolutisms casually. Hence, the problem with saying some is that we must quantify what we mean by it, which cannot be done as readily as simply saying, of course, or some of the other absolutisms I've mentioned. Saying some requires research, which requires time and effort, and even then we'll still end up with an evidence-based statement that sounds less impressive than one that simply begins with, of course. If, for example, I say 53% of linguists agree that we tend to use absolutisms casually, then there's a good chance that they're wrong, right? At least 47% chance. Or if I say a peer-reviewed study among linguists finds that 95% of us tend to use absolutisms casually, there are still some who don't. And this less than 5% chance is enough to make the statement sound weaker than simply saying, of course we tend to use absolutisms casually. Now, if all of this has become a little too abstract and hard to follow, I get it, but please work to stay with me today because I consider this topic fundamental to being a sound thinker. It may help for me to repeat the variations of the sentence I presented so far. We tend to use absolutisms casually. It seems to me we tend to use absolutisms casually. Some linguists say we tend to use absolutisms casually. Most linguists agree that we tend to use absolutisms casually. A few linguists agree that we tend to use absolutisms casually. 53% of linguists say we tend to use absolutisms casually. 95% of linguists say we tend to use absolutisms casually. Of course, we tend to use absolutisms casually. This last version of the sentence, which is the one I had intended to begin with, still seems the most potent of them all, the most convincing, even though it is the least substantiated statement among them. Yet another problem with quantifying our arguments, as we have seen here, is that it just takes way too much time. It's difficult to imagine researching the truth value of every statement we make and still having time to actually say something, in case you haven't noticed. Right? The sentence I've now been talking about for quite some time was meant to be the 6th sentence of this discourse. Since then, I have uttered 34 compound sentences to explain why I didn't use it. Who has that kind of time when trying to communicate effectively and efficiently with others? I'm guessing few of us do, but I would also suggest, because of our commitment to our liberal values and to fashioning a liberal society in which freedom, reason, and tolerance are the values inherent in all that we do, that it is important for us to wean ourselves off using absolutisms in our ordinary speech, because doing so lends itself well to extremist thinking and intolerant behavior that has become rampant in our society. Thinking about how we say things helps us become aware of bad linguistic habits and to work on replacing them with better alternatives. This year, I've resolved to lessen my use of absolutisms in my writing and speech in order to promote a world that is more honest, less extreme, and better adept at coping with life's ambiguities and uncertainties. For example, rather than saying, of course, it's just as easy to say something like, I'm guessing, or my guess is, or I presume, or perhaps. So now that we have settled the matter of how I should begin my 6th sentence of today's message, let the sermon continue. I'm guessing that we tend to use absolutisms casually. As noted, using such idioms is common speech, in common speech, even if we don't mean to sound so certain of ourselves, reinforces absolutist thinking, which fosters dogmatism, intolerance, and extremism. Such rigidity is delusional because it refuses to recognize and cope with the uncertainty of life. As sociologist Erich Fromm once said, life is never certain, never predictable, never controllable. In order to make life controllable, it must be transformed into death. Just as the body becomes rigid upon death, rigid thinking represents dead ideas. Ideas that cannot grow, or adapt, or breathe, or create, or imagine, because they are out of harmony with the uncertain, ambiguous nature of living. The certainty with which we often express ourselves, even if only by thoughtless habit, may be symptomatic of both our society's need for coherence among its populace in order to foster cooperation and compliance, and our biological instinct toward repetition. The more an organism repeats itself, repeats the behaviors that don't get it killed, the more habitual they become, to the point of eventually behaviorally defining a species as they get genetically passed on. As a thinking species, evolution has given us a psyche driven to repeat the ideas that haven't gotten us killed so far. This ideological repetition, rooted in our fear of the unknown, leads to rigid societies and rigid thinking that are intolerant of new ideas and those with other ideas. No wonder we have evolved to use absolutisms in our ordinary speech. Doing so is part of our inborn survival instinct. Did I just say no wonder? I'm going to put that on my list. The feeling of certainty is a kind of matrix that we've set up for ourselves, or that has been set up for us by previous generations attempting to erect systems guaranteeing we will always stick to the tried and true, even if the tried and true has become too rigid and lifeless to help us cope with the changes around us. Some rigid ideas eventually lead to our own detriment and destruction, like clinging to nationalism in an age of globalism, or embracing the continued use of fossil fuels in an age of global warming, or clinging to gun rights in an era of assault rifles and mass shootings. So I consider it important for us to start using language in a way that reflects the dynamic, evolving, flexible, and uncertain nature of life and its ambiguous realities, rather than using language to unthinkingly prop up dead, inflexible, rigid ideas that mislead us into thinking we are in control and that we can be confident of what comes next. Toward this end, let us return to the old thinking of Aristotle, who developed his system of logic 2,400 years ago. Logic may be old, but it is not dead, although sadly it has never become our main way of thinking. Aristotle discovered that there are only 4 categories that all assertions of truth fall into. That's a pretty good tool, right? Just 4. Those are all, none, some, and some not. When we're talking about what's true, those are the categories. If we say something is true about politicians, for example, we are either referring to all politicians, to no politicians, to some politicians, or to some politicians who are not what we are claiming. All politicians are corrupt. No politicians are corrupt. Some politicians are corrupt. Some politicians are not corrupt. When speaking of all or none, we're speaking universally because we leave no room for a single exception, right? All or none. When speaking of some who are or some who are not, we are speaking only of particular instances which may have a few or many exceptions. And that is about as simple as I can put it. So please again work to stay with me, even if it's a little hard, because this is important information. Thinking well takes effort. It doesn't come naturally. Yet being thoughtful is important work. The point I want to make, and that I want you to hear, is that when we speak in universal terms, like claiming all politicians are corrupt or no politicians are corrupt, we think we have the stronger argument because we aren't allowing for a single exception. We sound certain. But in reality, our argument is extremely weak. It is so unyielding and rigid that it can be shattered with the slightest thump. To disprove such an assertion, all one needs to do is find a single example which makes the entire thing false. Then the entire statement becomes untrue. One exception that proves not all politicians are corrupt. The statements all politicians are corrupt and some politicians are not corrupt cannot both be true. If One is true, the other must be false. If, on the other hand, we speak in particulars, by claiming only that some politicians are corrupt or some politicians are not corrupt, we make what on the surface seems like a weaker claim, but in reality, it is almost incontrovertible. By saying some or some not, all we need to do is find one example in which a politician has been corrupt or proven to be incorrupt, and we have proven our point. Such arguments, as I have said, are even better when there is data backing them up, so we have an idea of what percentage of them are or are not corrupt, per our example. But the main point is that what we intuitively feel is the weaker position is actually the stronger position. Avoiding absolutisms does not diminish our thinking, but strengthens it. This is important to grasp not only for the sake of cutting our politicians a little slack, since I've used them in this example, but because extremist thinking also leads to other kinds of unsound and unwarranted prejudices. We might get an idea in our heads about Trump voters, and then presume it must apply to all or at least to most of them. But we may not have met or spoken to many Trump supporters, using our limited interactions with only a few to make universal assumptions about them all, which can easily be shattered by finding only one exception to our prejudice. Like the Trump voter I spoke with at a hardware store a couple years ago, who had voted for Barack Obama twice. Similarly, when Trump once implied that all or most of the Mexicans illegally crossing the border are rapists, criminals, and drug dealers, he made a prejudicial statement that is very easy to disprove, because there are many examples of Mexican immigrants who are not fiendish criminals. Today, the woke left and woke authors like Robin DiAngelo are making lots of claims about white people, especially about white straight males, that they consider to be universally true, that is, of all white people. In their extremism, they feel certain that they must be right, but their claims are extremely weak because it is simple to find examples that are contrary to their assertions, to their claims. It is a simple matter, that is, to find white people, including white straight males, who are not racist and do not suffer from so-called white fragility, and many whites whose so-called privilege has earned them a cardboard sign on a cold street corner. Many of our unsound prejudices in the past, present, and future were, are, and shall be based upon extremist thinking. The old belief that people with dark skin were inferior to others, or that males are smarter than females, or that homeless people are mentally ill and substance abusers, or that billionaires are greedy and selfish, or that politicians are corrupt for that matter, are among the many prejudices encouraged by our ordinary overuse and casual misuse of absolutisms. Absolutely, definitely, totally, exactly, precisely, I completely agree, for sure, surely, sure thing, you bet, of course, without a doubt, no question. Or certainly not, surely not, of course not, absolutely not, I totally disagree, I completely disagree, no way, that's insane, that's crazy, that's nuts. Or no wonder. Add that to my list. But when we start thinking in terms of some, that only some people fit our stereotypes, and that without extensive research, we have no way to quantify exactly how many that might be, then perhaps we'll realize the futility of speaking in prejudicial stereotypes and be a little humbler about our assertions to begin with. Absolutisms also lead us to inflate some into all. To inflate some into all. For example, we find ourselves traveling in Seattle, and we get cut off in traffic by someone who blows past us in the fast lane and think, man, these Seattle drivers are crazy. We blow the experience out of proportion when in reality, most of the Seattle drivers we encountered have driven courteously and by the rules of the road. And I often hear individuals try to prove something they claim is always true by giving a single anecdotal experience of their own, as if it is reasonable to draw general conclusions about the whole world based upon the limitations of our own experiences. I suspect this is fairly common. In recent years, there have been a lot of universal conclusions about police officers and policing based upon the horrific officer-involved killings of individuals like George Floyd. Some believe these killings implicate all police officers. Others claim they are only the result of a few bad apples. Seeing these terrible scenes in the news is enough for any of us to reasonably conclude that some police officers, at the very least, are either racist or have unconscious prejudices. Yet it is also reasonable to conclude that some officers can be found who are not racist and hold no such biases. To understand just how widespread this problem truly is, we need to look at reliable research in order to come up with substantiated data to help us determine if by some we're talking about a few, by many, or by most police officers. But this takes effort. It's a lot easier to look at those horrific images we've seen on the news and immediately draw emotionally driven and broad conclusions about policing in general. Or, on the other hand, to consider some of the kind-hearted and professional officers that we have encountered in our lives and conclude that it must be just a few bad apples. Whatever the reality, and probably both are true to some extent, the work is finding out to what extent, right? So whatever the reality, we can be almost sure that this truth is ambiguous. It is not absolute, as it is with life in general, because again, life is never certain, never predictable. So I'm going to be keeping all of this in mind during the year ahead as I write my sermons, which will be easier for me to monitor than my everyday speech. I often find myself saying things like absolutely, or I totally agree, or for sure, or no wonder, apparently, when engaging in informal, friendly conversation. I'm going to work on substituting these absolutisms with phrases like, that seems reasonable to me, or based on what little I know, I would agree, or simply I agree, or instead of referring to the ideas I disagree with as insane, nuts, or saying I completely disagree or no way, I'm going to work on just saying that doesn't seem right to me, or I don't get it, or I disagree. This prospect is as exciting to me as it is daunting because it's both an area of growth as well as a serious challenge to catch myself engaging in habitual speech patterns during emotionally laden conversation. But I am resolved to do my best, and I feel confident that I will have some success. And this is ultimately what the effort is all about, not merely modeling a less rigid form of speech and thought, but learning to better speak and think in ways that are evolving, adapting, breathing, uncertain, and thus alive. Thank you.
Well, we're going to sing what I think is kind of a fun song. It comes from the late 50s, by the way. And we're going to do the Frank Sinatra version. So please stand to sing High Hopes. There are a couple of places where I'll sing a line or two to you before you come back with the line you probably already know. So be on the watch for those. Next time you're found with your chin on the ground, there's a lot to be learned. So look around. Here we go. Just what makes that little old ant think he'll move that rubber tree plant? Anyone knows an ant can't move a rubber tree plant, but he's got high hopes. He's got high hopes. He's got high in the pineapple. High hopes. So anytime you're getting low, instead of letting go, just remember that ant. Oops, there goes another rubber tree. Oops, there goes another rubber tree. Oops, there goes another rubber tree plant. When troubles call and your back's to the wall, there's a lot to be learned. That wall could fall. Once there was a silly old ram, thought he'd punch a hole in the dam. No one can make that ram scram. He kept butting that dam 'cause he had high hopes. He had high hopes. He had high apple pie in the sky. Hope so anytime you're feeling bad, instead of letting that, just remember that ram. Oops, there goes a million kilowatt. Oops, there goes a million kilowatt. Oops, there goes a million kilowatt dam. Our problem's just a toy balloon. They'll be bursting soon. They're just bound to go pop. Oops, there goes another problem curve. Oops, there goes another problem curve. Oops, there goes another problem curve. Plop, curve, plop.
For the benediction this morning, I learned that accepting others and accepting myself are two sides of the same coin. You can't love and accept yourself without doing the same for others. Steve Pavlina. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.